That girl should have been taken away at 10. That's what Madison heard her aunt whisper at a family gathering when she was just 12. They didn't know she was listening, but she heard it all. She heard them talk about her as if she were broken. Dangerous. A ticking time bomb no one wanted to deal with. One night, they took her to a psychiatric hospital just to talk, and they never came back. No phone calls, no birthdays, no visits. For 5 long years, Madison was abandoned by the very people who were supposed to protect her. But what happens when the broken girl comes back successful and holds their fate in her hands? If you've ever been blamed for your pain hit like, if they made you feel crazy for speaking up, comment, "I survived," and subscribe, "We're telling stories that heal." Madison was labeled before she could even understand the weight of a label. Growing up, she was a quiet child, introspective, imaginative, and at times deeply emotional. But in a family that prided itself on appearances, she was seen as a liability. Her emotional outbursts were misread as instability. Her silence was mistaken for defiance. Instead of love, she got lectures. Instead of comfort, suspicion. When she turned 10, things escalated. After one particularly intense panic episode, triggered by her uncle's cruel remarks, they called it, "She's mentally unstable." Her mother signed the forms. Her father didn't even look her in the eye. They dropped her off at a facility that felt more like a prison than a hospital. They said they'd return. They never did. And Madison, she stopped waiting. Instead, she read. She studied. She rebuilt herself from the ground up. And by the time she turned 25, the girl they abandoned had become one of the most respected psychiatric doctors in the state. But fate had one more twist waiting for her because her newest patient was her own mother. Before Madison could face the woman who left her behind, she had to confront the past that nearly destroyed her. Madison didn't cry the day they left her at the hospital. She stood in the middle of the lobby, clutching the sleeves of her sweatshirt, watching the glass doors slide shut behind her mother. No wave, no hug, no goodbye, just silence. That silence would follow her for years. She was only 10. But even then she understood something most children don't. She was disposable. The doctors said she had emotional dysregulation. The nurses gave her crayons and tried to cheer her up. But Madison wasn't confused. She wasn't delusional. She was heartbroken. Not from chemical imbalances, but from being unwanted. At night, she would listen to the other children cry in their beds. Some had visitors. Some got gifts. Madison, nothing. Not even a phone call. One Christmas, she made a card for her mother. Drew a little tree, colored it green. Wrote, "I'm trying really hard to be good. Please come see me." She gave it to a nurse to mail. No one ever replied. She wasn't born broken. She was made to feel that way. Before the hospital, Madison's life had been tense. Her family was the kind that smiled for the neighbors, but seethed behind closed doors. Her mother was cold, controlling. Her father was distant. And her relatives, they whispered behind her back. Her aunt once said she's too sensitive. That girl always needs something. What Madison needed was love. What she got was judgment. Her panic attacks were framed as drama. Her depression called laziness. When she spoke up, they told her she was making things up for attention. And so little by little, Madison folded inward. She stopped crying. She stopped speaking. She stopped hoping. Until one day they gave up pretending and sent her away. The institution was sterile and gray. The food was bland. The therapy sessions felt like interrogation. But within that bleak environment, Madison discovered something: books. Psychology, psychiatry, human behavior. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was locked away under the assumption she was crazy, but she quickly became the sharpest mind in the building. By age 14, she was quoting Freud and Jung to the staff. At 16, she was released not because her family asked, but because she had completed her rehabilitation and legally aged out of the program. She had nowhere to go. Her mother declined custody, so she went into the foster system. Those years were brutal. She moved from house to house, taking buses across the city to attend high school. She worked night shifts, cleaned bathrooms, studied in supply closets. She graduated valedictorian. And when no one showed up to her graduation, she stood on the stage with tears in her eyes, not because she was sad, but because she had survived. College was her rebirth. It was the first time in her life she wasn't defined by her past. She studied psychology. She earned scholarships. She volunteered at shelters. She understood pain intimately, and so people trusted her. By 25, she had a PhD, a steady practice, and a reputation for helping patients that others had given up on. But no matter how far she climbed, the shadow of abandonment never fully left her. Sometimes in the middle of a session, a scent or a phrase would yank her back to that hospital hallway, standing alone in a threadbare sweatshirt. Sometimes when patients spoke of mothers who never listened, she had to fight back tears. She didn't talk about her past, not to colleagues, not to friends. The few people who tried to get close eventually drifted away. She was warm with strangers, but guarded with everyone else, because deep down, she still carried the question every abandoned child asks: why didn't they come back for me? Then one morning, everything changed. She walked into her clinic to find a new patient file on her desk. Female, mid-50s, signs of early cognitive decline, referred by the county due to erratic behavior and memory loss. There was a name, a face: her mother. At first, Madison thought it was a mistake, some cruel trick of the universe. But it wasn't. The woman who had walked away without a second glance was now sitting in Madison's waiting room, lost and vulnerable, not even recognizing her own daughter. Madison froze. All the walls she'd built, professionalism, detachment, logic, cracked in an instant. She peeked through the door's glass window. There she was, thinner, older, tired. Madison's hands trembled, and in that moment, she faced a storm of conflicting feelings: rage, sorrow, disbelief, and something else. Something far more dangerous: compassion. But could Madison really help the woman who broke her, or would facing her mother risk everything she had built? The answer lay in one unforgettable session. Madison sat in her office chair staring at the intake form like it was a ghost. Her mother's name. Her mother's face. Her mother's confused signature scribbled like a stranger's. The receptionist had no idea who the woman was to Madison. Why would she? Madison never talked about her past. As far as anyone at the clinic knew, she'd grown up like anyone else, maybe with a tough childhood, sure, but not abandoned, not institutionalized, not discarded. Now across the clinic hallway, the woman who had walked out of Madison's life 15 years ago was waiting for therapy from her own daughter. Madison had every right to refuse. Ethically, emotionally, she could have handed the case to a colleague. but something deep inside her buried and breathing beneath layers of trauma whispered, "Don't run this time." She opened the door to the session room. Her mother sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking smaller than Madison remembered. Her hair was streaked with gray. Her eyes were dim, a soft cloud of confusion settling behind them. "Hello, Mrs. Grant," Madison said, her voice steady. "I'm Dr. Ellis. I'll be conducting your evaluation." Her mother blinked, then smiled politely. "You look familiar," she said. Madison froze. Was it recognition, flicker of memory? But her mother just shook her head and looked away. "You remind me of someone I used to know." Over the next few weeks, Madison saw her mother once a week. They talked about simple things, routines, memory lapses, moments of confusion. Her mother struggled with sequencing, forgot dates, mixed up names, told stories with missing pieces. But sometimes when she was relaxed, things slipped out. "I used to have a daughter," she said once, as if it were a minor fact. "Troubled girl. Emotional. She cried too much. I couldn't take it. Another time, I wonder what happened to her. Maybe she's fine now. Maybe she finally got the help she needed." Madison had to bite her tongue so hard, she tasted blood. She began recording the sessions legally with consent. Her mother didn't care. She didn't remember things 5 minutes later, let alone object to being recorded. What Madison was capturing wasn't just therapy. It was testimony, confessions scattered and broken from a woman who'd spent years hiding her cruelty behind polite smiles and medical excuses. Then came the day everything changed. It was raining. Thunder rattled the windows. Madison brought her mother a cup of tea chamomile, just like she remembered. Her mother stared at the cup for a long time. Then, unprompted, she whispered, "I left her, you know. The doctors said it might be hereditary, that she could grow up like my sister. I couldn't bear it. I didn't want that disease in my house, so I left her." She looked up at Madison, her voice suddenly sharp, lucid. "She was just 10, but I knew she would ruin everything." Madison's heart thudded in her chest. This wasn't dementia. This wasn't confusion. For that moment, clear as glass, her mother knew exactly what she had done. "She tried to hug me in the parking lot," her mother added, shaking her head. "I pushed her away. I didn't even look back." A tear rolled down Madison's cheek. But she didn't cry out of pain. Not this time. She cried because she had it. The truth. Undeniable. Unfiltered. On record. Later that night, Madison locked her office, took the recordings home, and sat alone on her living room floor. She listened to every second, reliving each word. She realized something strange. Even after all these years, all the silence, all the abandonment, she still wanted her mother to love her. She still hoped somewhere, deep inside, that her mother would look at her one day and say, "I'm sorry." But that day wasn't coming. Madison knew that now. So she changed course. She went to her attorney and filed a claim to reopen her legal records. She requested a review of the court order that had stripped her family rights as a child. With the recorded admissions, she had proof that her institutionalization wasn't based on medical necessity, but on fear and emotional neglect. The case made waves in the psychiatric community. A renowned therapist, formerly institutionalized herself, presenting concrete evidence of medical and familial abuse. News outlets picked up the story. Professionals reached out, Some praised her, others doubted her, but no one ignored her. Her story went viral not because it was scandalous, but because it exposed a truth many had lived through. Families don't need to scream to be abusive. Sometimes they just need to walk away. But the real twist hadn't come yet. After months of proceedings, the court ruled in Madison's favor. Her juvenile file was amended. Her original diagnoses were struck down. She was granted access to family estate records and given legal grounds to challenge her exclusion from her grandmother's will her mother had allegedly misplaced years earlier. That's when she discovered something chilling. Her grandmother had left everything to Madison: property, investments, letters of apology. But after Madison was institutionalized, her mother had declared her unfit and claimed it all herself. She forged documents, lied in court, buried the truth. Now Madison had the proof and the power to take it all back. And she did. She reclaimed the estate. She funded scholarships for children who'd been abandoned by the system just like she was. She built a free clinic for adolescent mental health and named it after the grandmother she never got to know. Her mother she remained under supervised care. Madison paid for her treatment, never visited, but never left her to suffer. People called her strong, brave, forgiving. But Madison didn't see it that way. She didn't do it to be noble. She did it because healing is the deepest form of revenge. But even with the truth revealed and the past rewritten, Madison wasn't done because her mother's final words in therapy would send her spiraling into a confrontation she never expected. The world may have applauded Madison for her calm, her strength, her quiet grace. But no one saw what happened behind closed doors, after the courtroom, after the articles, after the speeches. Because for all her triumphs, Madison still woke up at 2 a.m., in a cold sweat breath, stuck in her throat, hearing the echo of that 10-year-old girl's voice, begging, "Please don't leave me here." She had reclaimed her name, her legacy, her truth. But she had never reclaimed herself. And then it happened just when she thought the past had no more poison left to spill. It was a quiet Thursday. Madison entered the clinic as usual. The air smelled of coffee and disinfectant. Her receptionist waved. Everything was normal. Until she opened her office door. On her desk was a sealed envelope. No name, no handwriting, just a plain white envelope sitting perfectly in the center. She hesitated, heart suddenly pounding. Inside was a single sheet of paper typed. "I know who you are. I know who she is. You used her condition to win sympathy and money. You're not a hero. You're just a bitter little girl, playing God with someone too sick to fight back. Don't pretend this is justice. This is revenge. No signature." Madison dropped the paper, like it burned. Someone knew. Someone was watching. Her hands trembled as she called the receptionist. No one had seen who left it. The security footage was mysteriously blank for that hour. Corrupted. Erased. That night, Madison sat in the clinic's darkened therapy room, clutching the letter. Her stomach churned. Her throat ached. Was it a former colleague, a relative, a patient, or was it her mother? Over the next few sessions, Madison kept her distance more reserved, more clinical. But her mother started speaking more freely, often drifting between lucidity and dementia. Then one day, unprompted, her mother whispered, You always wanted revenge. That's what you wanted all along, didn't you? To punish me." It wasn't the words that struck Madison. It was the smile that followed. Smug. Sharp. Clear. She was faking. Not all the time, but enough. Enough to manipulate. Enough to twist sympathy back into control. Madison's blood turned cold. All this time, she hadn't been caring for a helpless old woman. She'd been sitting across from the same emotional abuser who had gaslit her into silence as a child, now weaponizing her weakness to make Madison look like the monster. And it was working. Words started getting around. A former patient of Madison's, one with ties to her mother's church group, posted a vague but viral accusation online. Something about Madison manipulating an elderly relative for personal gain. The comments exploded. People began questioning her ethics. Her clinic received anonymous calls, emails, 1-star reviews. Journalists reached out. Reporters camped outside her building. Even fellow doctors began pulling away. All it took was a little doubt. Madison had spent years building a life beyond the pain. And in a matter of weeks, her mother, without even lifting a finger, had set it all ablaze again. She snapped. Not in front of anyone, not at work, but alone. In her apartment, surrounded by degrees and framed articles, with the letter still in her pocket. She screamed. She threw a mug against the wall. She punched her couch cushions until her arms ached. She cried the kind of cry she hadn't allowed herself in 15 years. It wasn't sadness. It was fury. Pure, molten, furious injustice. "What else do you want from me?" she shouted to no one. "I did everything right. I forgave. I paid for her care. I stayed silent. I didn't expose her. I kept my distance. I gave her dignity. I gave her more than she ever gave me. And she still found a way to make me look like the villain." She collapsed on the floor, sobbing into her knees, not just as a therapist, or a survivor, or a professional, but as a daughter who finally realized no amount of healing could make some people less cruel. And that was the moment something cracked. Not the kind of crack that shatters. The kind that splits open the truth. Madison saw it all clearly now. She had spent her life proving she was good, stable, worthy of love, not to the world, but to the mother who threw her away. She had turned forgiveness into performance, compassion into strategy, success into silence. But her mother didn't need forgiveness. She needed exposure, not to punish, but to protect Madison's own peace. The next day, Madison walked into her attorney's office with a flash drive. On it, every therapy session, every confession, every moment of cognitive lucidity. She also brought in her medical records from childhood, the legal trail of forced institutionalization, the court ruling that validated her. And then she filed an official declaration of medical fraud against her mother, and against every doctor who had colluded to institutionalize her without merit. She also authorized a public op-ed under her name. Not a scandal. A truth bomb, titled, "When Abusers Grow Old." The Silent War, Daughters Fight Alone. It wasn't angry. It was clinical, articulate, human, and it spread like wildfire. Survivors reached out from everywhere. Thousands of comments, emails, messages. She was no longer the villain in someone else's rewrite of her life. She had taken the pen back. But as freeing as it was, There was one more confrontation she couldn't avoid. The next session, Madison sat across from her mother, now visibly weaker. Her voice cracked, her hands trembled, and for the first time in over a decade, Madison spoke not as a therapist, but as the daughter who had been locked away. "I forgive you," she said, "but not because you deserve it, because I do. You don't get to narrate my story anymore. I'm done explaining myself to ghosts." Her mother blinked, confused, maybe pretending, maybe not. It didn't matter. Madison stood up, packed her notes, and walked out. She never looked back. But once the anger cooled and the dust settled, Madison had to face the question she'd avoided her whole life. What does healing look like? When no one apologizes. For the first time in her life, Madison took a leave of absence. No phones, no patients, no legal teams, no press interviews, just silence. She rented a small cabin 2 hours outside the city, a place with no internet, no distractions, just tall pine trees, misty mornings, and the sound of birds instead of voices. It wasn't about running away. It was about finally sitting still. The days blurred together in a strange, quiet rhythm. She made tea. She read books that had nothing to do with trauma. She wrote in a notebook not about others, but about herself. And every night she sat on the back porch and let the darkness hold her. Not scare her, not haunt her, just hold her. One morning, while grocery shopping in the tiny town nearby Madison, ran into an elderly woman in the tea aisle. She had short, silver hair and a laugh like warm bread. They reached for the same chamomile box and chuckled. The woman glanced at Madison's retreat-worn hoodie. "You up here to hide or to heal?" Madison paused, then smiled. "Both." The woman nodded. "Good. That's allowed." Over the next few days they crossed paths again at the local bakery, the bookstore, even the lakeside walking trail. Her name was June. She used to be a social worker. Retired now, widowed, lived alone with 2 cats and a massive garden. Madison didn't tell her everything, but she didn't have to. June saw it anyway. One afternoon as they sat on a bench, watching ducks, June turned to her and said, "You know, they always talk about forgiveness like it's about letting someone else off the hook. But really, it's about unhooking yourself." Madison exhaled like her lungs had been holding something for years. That evening, back in the cabin, Madison opened her notebook to a blank page and wrote one sentence. "I don't have to carry this anymore." She stared at it for a long time. Not because it felt powerful, but because it felt true. She had spent her entire adult life trying to undo a decision made when she was 10 years old, trying to prove she wasn't broken, trying to be good enough, smart enough, useful enough to justify her place in the world. And she had done it. She had succeeded. But success isn't the same as peace. That night she made a decision. She wasn't going to let the past define her story any longer. Not out of vengeance, not out of pain, but out of choice. The next morning, Madison drove back to the city. She didn't return to her clinic. She went straight to the state psychiatric board. She resigned her private license. Not in disgrace, not under pressure. She simply let it go, because healing for others had always come naturally. But healing herself, that required a different kind of bravery. She wrote a letter to her patients, her colleagues, and her followers. Sometimes we become experts at helping people through pain because we never learned how to live without it. I am learning now. Slowly. Gently. And for once, not for anyone else's approval, but for my own peace. The responses were overwhelming. Some were confused. Some disappointed. But most were moved. Because for many, Madison had become a symbol not of perfection, but of resilience. And now she was showing them what wholeness could look like, even if it didn't come in a straight line. In the weeks that followed, Madison began volunteering again, but this time with no title, no business cards, just her presence. She worked in a women's shelter, helped teens who had aged out of the foster system. She sat in circles with survivors and listened without needing to fix them. And through those stories, raw, painful, real, she found something she hadn't expected: connection. Not as a therapist, not as a victim, just as a human being. One day, while leading a journaling workshop, one of the girls, a shy, anxious 19-year-old, approached her afterward. "I read your article," she whispered. "The one about daughters." Madison nodded gently. The girl looked down, fiddling with her bracelet. "I thought I was the only one." Madison reached out, touched her arm. "You're not." And for the first time, she knew she didn't have to prove anything else, because she had become the woman she needed as a child. That night, Madison walked through the quiet streets of her city with a calm she hadn't known in years. She no longer needed to win, or to fight, or to prove. She had chosen her own worth, not because they said she had it, but because she finally believed it herself. But peace doesn't mean passivity. And when the time came to face the final consequences of her truth, Madison stood taller than ever. Madison returned to the city, not as a therapist, not as a patient, but as a witness. With the evidence she had gathered, recordings, falsified documents, handwritten letters. Her legal team filed a formal motion to reopen the probate case surrounding her grandmother's estate. The motion included new claims: fraud, elder manipulation, and perjury committed by her mother. At first, the family, especially her aunt and cousin, who had benefited financially, scoffed. They called her dramatic, unstable, said she was reliving old fantasies. But once the court hearings began, the truth marched into the light, loud, undeniable, and devastating. The tapes were played. Her mother's words, clear and cruel, echoed through the courtroom. "I didn't want that disease in my house. So I left her. I knew she would ruin everything." The judge's expression hardened. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. The once proud relatives who had called her the broken girl were now caught scrambling, exposed as complicit liars or cowards who stood by. The ruling was swift. The entire estate, every dollar, every asset, was rightfully awarded to Madison. Her family's objections were dismissed as frivolous and legally meritless. And when the verdict was read, Madison didn't smile. She just exhaled. Not in victory, but in release. She didn't gloat. She didn't look back at them. But the image of her aunt, red-faced, humiliated, being escorted from the courtroom after trying to shout accusations, was a moment of justice more satisfying than any revenge fantasy. Her story had once been erased. Now, it was recorded in the public record. Permanent. Untouched by shame. The girl they threw away had become the woman they had to answer to. And as the dust of justice finally settled, Madison found herself standing at the edge of something. She had never known a life defined not by pain, but by possibility. Madison didn't ride off into the sunset. She walked barefoot across her grandmother's garden, newly restored, blooming with lavender and rosemary. The estate was no longer a symbol of what was stolen. It had become a place of return, not to the past, but to herself. She no longer needed titles to prove her worth, no longer needed silence to keep the peace. She had spoken. She had acted. She had healed not by pretending nothing happened, but by honoring every scar. Her mother lived out her final days in a care facility, her mind drifting between memory and fog. Madison visited once quietly, not for closure, but to witness the truth with her own eyes. Then she left without bitterness, because real power doesn't come from revenge. It comes from knowing you survived and choosing yourself anyway. Madison now runs a quiet foundation in her grandmother's name, supporting young women emerging from fractured homes. No fanfare, just quiet, purposeful healing. And when people ask how she got here, she simply says, "I stopped waiting for an apology and started becoming the woman I needed." If this story touched something in you, share it. And if you've ever walked through fire to find yourself, you're not alone. Tell your story. We're listening.